one of the interesting things for us with moving to the assurance model is to be really open to the perspectives of others, positive, negative. We started to, in our annual education results report, we started to address some of the larger concerns that are raised. You've probably seen on television the talk show hosts that do the mean tweets, and they have celebrities that read, and not quite to that extent, but we certainly, if people have harsh things to say about us in our annual reports, we include those comments and we provide feedback. And transparency is a big part of building confidence, right? If people know that they have contributed to a survey and said something and it never shows up anywhere, then they lose confidence with that.
We hear a lot today about transparency from our politicians and government specifically, and also from our schools and our school districts and school divisions. It's done differently in all kinds of jurisdictions, but it's been very intriguing to me to watch and see the way that Alberta education has embraced this idea of transparency through their assurance model. If you were with me in my previous conversation with Paul Corrigan of Elk Island Catholic, we talked about that a little bit, but I wanted to dive deeper in it. So I called upon Scott Johnston from Parkland School Division. Scott is an associate superintendent there. He's been with that school division for a number of years, and in this particular role, I believe for around 9 years, and is very well versed in the implications of an assurance model and providing more transparency to stakeholders, and indeed the benefits. And so that's what our conversation largely focuses around, is what does that mean to be transparent? How do we do that? And understanding the complexities of it. It's perhaps a straightforward concept, but at the same time, it doesn't come with simply just opening up the windows and the doors of your establishment and just having people come in. So I think this is a really timely conversation, and I think everyone's going to find it very interesting to see how indeed people do that. So enjoy my conversation today with Scott Johnston. For people that may not know what the assurance model is, maybe give us a little background as to what it is, and maybe something that might showcase something that other provinces don't have.
I believe it was 2014. There were a number of meetings. Alberta Education had a number of meetings to look at. I think the intent at first might have been to sort of reconsider the APORI, the Accountability Pillar Online Results Initiative, and to just really look at how to change or reconceptualize planning and reporting. And the concept of assurance is really about how we understand stakeholder confidence. And so I've had to speak on this a few times, and with different groups who have stronger or less strong knowledge of education. And one of the things, I sometimes use the metaphor, all cars are automobiles, but not all automobiles are cars. Assurance includes accountability, but accountability is not necessarily assurance. And so the interesting thing is, assurance is a measure of confidence. If you and I start with a sentence, stakeholders will have trust and confidence that, and then put in any educational thing after that. How do you measure that then, right? Stakeholders will have trust and confidence that children are happy. That's an assurance measure, but how do you actually measure what's behind that? So the province in 2014 engaged Alberta Teachers Association, College of Alberta School Superintendents, the Dean's Group, Alberta School Boards Association, a number of groups. And we got together, I want to say about 10 times. Maybe that might be an exaggeration, but it felt like about 10 times to have all sorts of meetings to sort of discuss, how we would merge into a better model. And from those conversations, the domain model of education emerged. And we've been sort of rolling since then.
And so a couple things, like number one, maybe expand a little bit on the specifics of a domain model, but also, so when you say, this is an intent to build confidence among stakeholders, with parents, community, so forth, and there's some measurement, and I know that in our conversations, you deal with a lot of the, let's just say, squeaky wheels, people who are not happy with things and who don't necessarily represent, the majority of stakeholders, but they are a thin slice and their voices can be loud and so forth. But can you speak to increased confidence amongst stakeholders during this time? And I don't know how if there's a way you can address that specifically. But so the two things, like, again, just help me understand the domain model. And secondly, what evidence or suggestions you might have that says our confidence has increased over time.
Sure. So if it's about stakeholder confidence and we wonder or we think about who the stakeholders are, the domain model really it's about examining educational goals and outcomes from particular perspective. So at the center of the domain is student growth and achievement. So everything that we do is, I mean, that's the center, student growth and achievement, right? Well, that's what we're here for essentially. And so if we're planning and reporting on things that are student centric, they would be within that domain. And a lot of our derived measures and results and the rest of that happens in that domain. Moving out from that particular shell, the next domain is teaching and leading. And so that's where, if you think about who interacts in schools with students the most, it's the teachers and leaders that are that do that work with students. And they are supported by the third domain, which is learning supports. And that's not just our educational assistants. They're a huge part of what is the learning support. But, I'm here in our Center for Education. We have departments of transportation and facilities and human resources and all of those support structures that exist, not just within the organization, but external to the organization would be part of that. Then we have the fourth shell in the domain model is governance. How is our system governed? That's the deciding body of our organization and way to go. And then all of that sits within, I don't even know if it's really a shell. We had lots of conversations of whether it's a shell or just sort of where all of this sits, which is our local and societal context. And Dr. Phil McRae really captured this well for me when he, to our group, he talked about sequencing of time. And I don't want to, it's been 9 years, so I don't necessarily misquote him, but it really stuck with me that the things that we do for students are minute by minute. If you think about a teacher may make a lesson plan and they may be working that lesson plan and it's not quite going well. So that is a plan that they're working on and they need to shift and pivot for the students and do something different. As we move out to the larger and larger domains or I guess the more encompassing domains, teaching and leading, we make year plans and unit plans. And, we think of the school year, for instance. Educational learning supports is part of that picture. Governance, we elect our governors on a 4-year. They tend to think in terms of 3-year plans and 4-year plans. And the local context, if we think about changing society in education, we sometimes talk about, planning and reporting and plans that we put in place. For instance, all the intensive literacy work we're doing now, we may not see the end result of that, for a decade. But even other local, how do you shift a community? How do you change things? How do you change your local context? It's generational, not minute by minute. So, so there's that part. In terms of how we measure confidence, I think if this is part of what gets at your second question, one of the interesting things for us with moving to the assurance model is to be really open to the perspectives of others, positive, negative. We started to really, in our annual education results report, we started to address some of the larger concerns that are raised. You've probably seen on television, the talk show hosts that do the mean tweets and they have celebrities that read and, not quite to that extent, but we certainly, if people have harsh things to say about us in our annual reports, we include those comments and we provide feedback and transparency is a big part of building confidence, right? If people know that they have contributed to a survey and said something and it never shows up anywhere, then they lose confidence with that.
Tell me a little bit about engagement days, because I think this speaks to building your confidence and increased transparency, and something that I'd never heard. Maybe other districts do this. I don't know, but the way you described it it sounded like something. And you said you do it a couple times a year. What are engagement days, and what are they for, and how have they been a part of? How have they supported your work?
I think it's a good question. I think all school divisions work diligently to engage with their stakeholders in a number of ways. We can't just rely on the provincial survey that goes out and is responded to. You know, we are fortunate and challenged by our geography. So, Parkland School Division, we're west of Edmonton. We extend out toward Tomahawk and Entwistle. So I think we're 100 kilometers. We're kind of we're a long division, or I guess a wide division, whatever you want to call it. So we do have some distance, but for the most part, if we have an event, people can get to the event. I know for other jurisdictions, some of the things this is a caveat, Dean. I'm just putting in because for other jurisdictions, what I'm about to talk about may not be possible. When they're spread across multiple hours. But we try to for various things that we have happen. We we certainly do try to engage our stakeholders as much as possible. We do annual engagement events. We have a November stakeholder engagement evening. We typically look to our assurance measures that we've received and our other measures, and the governors will determine what questions they want to engage stakeholders on. And then in the spring, we have a full day education planning day. We bring in a fairly equal representation of teachers, leaders, parents, community members, educational assistants. And that's a full day of education planning, looking at perspectives, running table groups through a number of topics, moving the people at the tables to have conversations with other groups. We, a good example, we recognized that we needed to make some changes with our transportation system to bring in some double running. It's not a popular decision. So we went out to engagements in various geographic centers in our jurisdiction to engage people. Some of that was teaching. Here's our current situation in Alberta. Here's how transportation operates. Here's our full budget. Here's what we have. We talked to people about the concept of taking educational dollars to pay for transport. Of course, the vast majority of people will say, no, we don't want educational dollars taken for transportation. We want transportation dollars used. So we did quite a bit of engagement around that. And, what came out of that is that we determined that we needed to double run some buses. So this meant that some of our city schools would start later in the day and some of our rural schools would start earlier in the day, which is a change for people. It's not a decision that made everybody happy, for sure, but it's one that was very seamless for us because our governors and our staff did all the work up front to have real conversations with people, to truly listen, to help our stakeholders understand the other side of that. Um, another example is school closure. It's never popular to close a school, but if you provide people with an opportunity to truly listen and listen first, right? Seek first to understand before being understood. Um, it, it's very helpful. At the end of the day, you're still going to make decisions that not everybody's happy with. That's just education.
Right.
I wish we could make everybody happy, but so the more we listen to and include people, the more authentic our plans are, and the more authentic our actions are to what our stakeholders know and understand and expect of us.
This episode is brought to you by Advanced Learning Partnerships, also known as ALP. We are a professional learning consulting group that serves communities across North America. We are partners, designers, and agents for change. You can learn more about the work we do at alplearn.com. And now back to the show. I think transparency, whether we're talking about schools or governments or whatever, is at least on the onset seeming like, well, this is a good thing. We want to be more transparent. I don't think anyone's going to argue that we wouldn't. However, like I know from my experience working at a school division, and that there are some topics that it's not that you don't want to be transparent, but it's just more difficult to help people understand the complexities. Like when you talk about the busing situation. Like it's a financial thing, right? Listen, here's why here's how much money we have, and we either have to spend it here or here. I mean, that's, again, I'm simplifying, but it's, I guess I'm saying it's a topic that can be more easily understood in some ways. If you're talking, however, about something like, let's say math's one where there's been math wars around, well, kids don't need to learn math in this way. And yet most of us that are involved with education, looking through the research, understand, yeah, it's not just about memorizing facts. And like, we know that that's not true. And yet there's, a lot of parents might see it like, why don't we just, that's how I learned it in school. And it was fine. I'm trying to understand how you balance that idea of being transparent. I mean, you can't be, you make hundreds of decisions every day that, transparency is just not even possible. Never mind when there are those situations, not that you would want to keep them from parents or stakeholders, but are very complex issues. I guess that's what I would say. And it's hard. It's hard to include people in a full engagement when, you spend a career, years understanding something, and they're trying to understand it from a newspaper article or wherever they're getting their own just individual experience.
At the end of the day, we're educators, though. This ought to be easier for us than other groups. Part of the transportation, perspective, part of that engagement is helping people understand that transportation in our province in 1919, I think, was one of the earliest you can sort of find anything in legislation, was that a child should be able to walk a mile and a half to school. And a mile and a half, when you convert that in the 70s into metric, becomes 2.4 kilometers, and it's been 2.4 kilometers ever since. Now, things have changed significantly. It's a lot to ask a kindergarten student to walk through urban Spruce Grove, 2.4 kilometers. But it helps people to understand this is how the funding model works. Let's put a pie shell on a school to show you what a 2.4 kilometer radius is from the school out. And they can see that that's the majority of the city. That's where the funding, so I think that assurance is about stakeholder confidence, and confidence, you don't have confidence if you don't have trust. And you don't have trust without transparency. And so if you're engaging people in all of the things that you can, the little things that happen, you can at least build, a strong group who feels that they have an understanding. They don't have to agree, but they should
Hmm.
understand. There's a lot, education has become, we talk about this in, in the business of education all the time, that in the last number of years, we've seen education become increasingly political, especially south of the border. There's a lot of stuff. And the interesting thing, I think, for me is that because we hear stuff that, from our perspective, we're like, that could never happen, would never happen. That's not what's happening. My concern is that, you know, um, not whether or not it's happening, but that we've created a situation where some things may be believable to be happening in education. And so we shouldn't be, we have to be as open as we possibly can about what we're doing, the decisions we're making, the dollars that are being spent, um, and not be afraid when people are going to disagree with that if we're doing things that we're doing for the right reason. And if we are communicating as much as we can, we'll build confidence. We won't necessarily build agreement, but we'll build confidence that, you know what, I don't like it. I don't like that my transportation fees are this, or school fees or whatever else, but I understand it.
Right.
And I'll,
And
that's good for me. If people understand it, whether or not they like it, that makes a difference.
well, and the other part of this is this transparency, the insurance. There's an underlying value in relationships, right? I mean, trust is built on those relationships. And so if I know Scott, again, I don't have to agree with everything Scott does, but I've heard him speak enough that I know his intentions are well-meaning, and I know that he has students' interests at the top of his guide. So I feel like all of the things you're speaking about, that's part of what this is building, is the trust comes from knowing. the individuals, knowing the reputation of Parkland School Division in that community, and over time, that social capital goes a long way in allowing you to do your job. And like you said before, again, when we talked the other day, you mentioned about people's crazy ideas of wondering if something is happening. Is like that. Like, think about it. That's not going to happen. Like, it- but the fact that people now are susceptible to the most bizarre conspiracy theories and ideas that exist. And if they don't have a means to actually check on that, right, they'll just make up their own story. And now that's what's happening. I heard from my cousin's uncle that
Yeah.
this is happening in this school district, as opposed to, well, why don't you just pick up the phone and say, hey, is this a thing? Right. So, and while I know those aren't probably the most fun conversations to have, the fact that at least you can perhaps alleviate a few people's
Yeah.
misconceptions probably has to be work in your favor at some point.
Yeah, for sure. I'm a huge fan of our school councils. So Parkland School Division, we have strong school councils. We have great parents in our division. We tonight, this evening, for instance, is our first council of school councils for this school year. And so representatives from our 23 schools, representative parents will come in and they have an opportunity to speak. I'm there. Some trustees will be there as well. And it's a good opportunity for us to dialogue on the regular about things that are happening. And we appreciate the value that our school councils, our well-connected parent group has for us. I'll give you an example. In the summer, we had a dumpster fire in the summer, and not a figurative dumpster fire. We had a literal dumpster fire that happened at a school. Somebody lit a fire in a dumpster. Fire department showed up. They were just down the road. The fire department showed up, put the dumpster fire out, end of story. However, the story didn't end because what ended up happening was somebody took to social media and said part of the school burned down, and it kind of snowballed from there to the point that the ministry was checking in on us saying, we understand you got damage to a particular school. And it was interesting because while it was happening, it was in summertime, but I connected with the school council chair of the school to say, can you help us out here with the social media side of things? Can you, you know, uh, make some comments that way? And our connected parents are excellent at being able to say, that's not true. That's not what happened, so that we don't necessarily have to wade into some of that social media mess. We prefer people come to our source. We'll communicate out. If they come to our website, they'll see that, here's a news item, here's what happened, here's how we dealt with it. By having that group of people, our involved parents help us out, it makes us so much stronger and so much
Yeah.
better able to communicate, right? But it's a give and take because they appreciate being able to show up and ask us hard questions and work
Hmm.
with people and have the conversations. And we empower them with knowledge about our system and not spin like this is,
Hmm.
here's the individual, this is what we do. So we continue to try to do that all the time. Engage
Well,
with
and
people.
and you, yeah, and they're now advocates for you. They're speaking on behalf of you, which is, I mean, how much more valuable can you have when they're speaking on your behalf? But again, to your point, it's like it works both ways. You get to come and ask the hard questions and disagree. But when we need you, you're there to, use your channels and so forth to advocate for us. So that's a great example.
The challenge is not everybody. It, like, honestly, people are busy, right? People are working hard. They're trying to do their work thing. They're trying to do the child raising thing and the rest of that. And we're grateful for our school councils. Certainly, we recognize, Collins and Porus, good to great. We recognize that we need to figure out how to reach all of our people, and school to home communication is tricky. When I look back to some of our old measures, we used to have comments about not communicating enough, and then you kind of hit a point where the comments shift from you're not communicating enough to it's hard to find clarity in communication. You can over communicate. If we send absolutely everything home, every newsletter, every item, I think for a parent who's just sort of trying to do all the things, that becomes overwhelming too.
Hmm.
So,
Hmm.
we have a great director of communications. We call it our strategic communications department because it's not about just communicating everything. It's about communicating in
Right.
a way, you know, you communicate to a person in the way that you expect they will want to be communicated to, if that makes sense.
Yeah. No, and again, I think this is all, it helps me out, it helps me can better understand kind of how your assurance model works and the trickle down effects to it. And this has just been uh, a great explanation. So I appreciate that from you, Scott. So before I let you go, I always like to ask people a little bit about some of the things that sort of spark their personal and professional interests, if you will. So I don't know, you got anything you're reading or listening to, or maybe it was over the summer that captured your attention?
Oh, yeah. A number of years ago, I stopped, not stopped, but there's a lot of educational literature, and I started to look to other industries and to uh, see what they're doing and how they're approaching the situation. Because I think the education well is well tapped. The police services have a book. I think it's called Beyond the Shield that talks about emotional labor and just the
Hmm.
drain that exists for people. So we can learn from that. There's a lot of business literature that is about conducting teams or collaborating. Cotter's work on change, systems thinking. I'm a huge Sengi fan, Wheatley. So, I think we need to look outside sometimes to sort of learn more about ourselves. And I want to, if I can, Dean, I just want to say I want to give a shout out to our schools and our school administration because all of our engagements that we do, our principals are at the tables. Principals and assistant principals are leading those conversations and doing the work to engage with people, and they show up to our council of school council meeting. So, I think if we could say that we're successful in that, we're successful because we have fantastic leaders who really understand the importance of assurance and understand the importance of listening to people, and then understand that that needs to then be put into action that those people can see themselves in. So I wanted to make sure I made that point as well.
Absolutely. Yeah. No, I mean, they're definitely kind of a linchpin of all of this work. The other question I was going to ask you is if there's any kind of guilty pleasure stuff you're watching, streaming. It doesn't have to be educational at all. Just something that maybe just is like, yeah, this is one of my favorite bingers or movies.
Well, I mean, I haven't met a person yet that wasn't a, huge Ted Lasso fan. And I found a show recently on Disney called The Bear. I don't know if you've seen The Bear. And it's about I think he's a Michelin star chef or a celebrated chef who comes home to take over the family restaurant. And it's such a beautifully done. There's 2 seasons out so far. The show is so beautifully done, so well filmed. I mean, certainly if a person's a foodie, I'm not a foodie, but I could see how foodies would particularly appreciate it. But it's such a capture of the human condition, um, and, uh, and how a group can come together and improve their collaboration. And, it's a lovely story. I think other people should watch The Bear as well. I,
Well,
I,
you're the second person I know who have recommended that. So that's going to have to be on my list. So, but
there's an
yeah,
episode that you'll know when you get to that captures dysfunction so well, like how they managed to film sort of family dysfunction and capture it from all of the angles. And it's just the show is just beautifully done. Kudos to the producers and certainly the actors. And I look forward to the next season. I really hope they continue on with it.
nice, nice. So the Spruce Grove area, and again, I'm not super familiar with the land west of where you are, but uh, what would people coming to that area maybe think to check out? I mean, so I'm not thinking so much of Edmonton. I am thinking more that western sh- area there that Parkland School Division incorporates. Any hidden gems, restaurants, or hiking places, or any other thing like that.
Oh, I enjoy all of our restaurants, and so if I give a shout out to one in particular, I'm going to be in trouble with all of the others. There's good eats out here, all of Alberta, and certainly out west here. There's there's lots of local breweries. There's no there's good things. We're when you leave Edmonton and you're heading toward Jasper, we're the first sort of school division you go through. west of Edmonton, Spruce Grove and Stony Plain. Spruce Grove it's a growing city. It's got a lot of energy to it. It's, every time you turn around, there's new businesses and new houses and new, which is causing us to grow in population and need new schools. We've got a number of new schools in Spruce Grove. Stony Plain is really tries to be a small town, but it's growing as well. It's the town with the painted past. So if you come into Stony Plain, there's murals all over the place. It's actually beautiful. And then, as you head west along Highway 16 toward Jasper, you see the rest of our jurisdiction all the way out to the Pembina River, which is where Entwistle School is. And south of that would be Tomahawk. And we have such a wonderful mix of people here. We've got people in oil and gas, we've got farmers, we've got sort of those suburban urban people, or urban, I think they sometimes call them, the acreage people, and wonderful families, good staff. Like, it's a real joy. It's a joy to work out here for sure. I I think too we've got a strong reputation. Are there going to be people who are disgruntled with some things? For sure. But for the most part, I can speak on behalf of our school councils and families that they appreciate the work that we're doing. And we as a team, the Office of the Superintendent surely appreciates the work that our staff are doing to continue to deliver results. It's just a great
Well,
place.
no doubt. No doubt. I've always had great experiences in Parkland School Divisions a few times that I've been able to work there and see the people there. And so just, yeah, it always seems like people are enjoying life. And like you said, nobody's under the illusion that everything is perfect. But as far as schools and school divisions go, it's pretty good. It's pretty good.
I like it.
Well, thank you, Scott. Yeah. Thank you,
I've been
Scott, for your time.
for
This
a
was
while.
great just getting to know a little bit more about what you guys are doing, and all the best for the rest of the school year.
Dean, this was a pleasure. Thanks so much for this opportunity. It's the first kind of one of these sort of things that I've done like this. So
Well, yeah, it's excellent. Super.